The snow crunched under the boots of the German soldiers as they advanced toward Holzweiler, France, on January 26, 1945. Ahead of them lay a single American lieutenant, alone on a burning tank destroyer, wielding a weapon that would soon become a nightmare for every German who heard its roar. In less than an hour, 250 men and 6 tanks would be reduced to just 70, shattered not by strategy or numbers, but by the relentless fury of a single Browning .50 caliber machine gun. The morning sky over Holzweiler was pale and frigid. Frost clung to the trees, and smoke from burning vehicles hung low over the battlefield. Inside a small German field aid station, soldiers whispered in disbelief, their faces pale as medics rushed in the wounded. They had just witnessed something impossible. First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, barely more than a boy, had climbed atop a flaming M10 tank destroyer, ignoring his own wounds. With hands steady despite pain, he operated the turret-mounted Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Round after round tore through the advancing German infantry, shredding armor, scattering men, and shattering morale. The weapon was simple, almost crude, but its effect was devastating. By the end of the hour, Murphy had inflicted approximately 50 casualties on the attacking company, a feat confirmed later by the Medal of Honor citation. German medics soon recognized the distinctive wounds caused by .50 caliber rounds, catastrophic damage that few survived. Limbs were torn apart, torsos obliterated. Unlike rifle bullets that might wound and allow recovery, these heavy rounds were instruments of near-certain death. But the impact went beyond the physical. German soldiers began to fear the sound of the gun, the deep rhythmic thunder echoing across the battlefield. It was a sound that announced doom, and it carried a psychological weight heavier than any artillery shell. Men who survived the first volley often froze in terror the next time they heard it, knowing that luck, not skill, would determine their survival. This was no isolated incident. From the forests of the Ardennes to the plains of Normandy, from North Africa to the skies over Germany, the .50 caliber machine gun became a symbol of American industrial and tactical superiority. It wasn't a secret wonder weapon, nor a marvel of German envy. It was mass-produced, reliable, and employed everywhere, on tanks, trucks, jeeps, aircraft, and even half-tracks. The Germans have been trained to respect precise, high-quality weapons like the MG-42, the 20mm, or the 30mm cannons in their Luftwaffe. But nothing could prepare them for an enemy who didn't rely on cleverness or efficiency. The Americans relied on sheer, unrelenting firepower. Every gun, every vehicle, every position brought a storm of lead that no human wave or tactical genius could overcome. Holzweiler became a testament to a new kind of warfare, industrial, relentless, and indiscriminate. By the time the survivors stumbled back to their lines, they carried with them a single, haunting lesson. The Americans didn't just fight differently. They fought mathematically. They fought with numbers, with bullets, with a weapon that turned courage into despair. And the .50 caliber machine gun was the embodiment of that doctrine, September 6, 1943. The skies over Stuttgart trembled under the approach of 388 American B-17 flying fortresses. German Luftwaffe pilots scrambled to intercept, confident in their Fowler-Wolf 190s, each bristling with cannons and machine guns. They had faced Allied bombers before, and they believed skill and experience would carry the day. But nothing prepared them for what they would encounter. As they dived toward the bombers, opening fire at 800 meters, something impossible happened. The American planes erupted, not in smoke from damage, but in a wall of gunfire. Each B-17 carried 13 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, and in a formation of 36 bombers, that meant 468 heavy guns all firing together. Over 6,000 rounds per minute roared toward the German attackers. Fowler-Wolf 190s shuddered under the assault. Wings, engines, and canopies were shredded before the pilots could react. Experienced aces, some with decades of combat behind them, were forced to break off and retreat. German losses were catastrophic, and the ones who survived carried a grim new understanding. They were not merely facing a weapon. They were facing an entire philosophy of warfare. The Americans had not built a single technological marvel. They had built a system, overlapping fields of fire, massed ammunition, and unyielding volume of fire. From the nose guns to tail turrets, from the waist of the ball turret, every angle of approach was covered. There was no safe path. Every tactic the Luftwaffe tried, head-on attacks, climbing from below, diving from above, flanking from the sides, was anticipated, punished, and often destroyed. John Heinrich Wormala, an ace with 93 confirmed kills, would later write in a letter home, "To attack the Americans is to fly through a storm of steel. You see the tracers 1 and 5, and know that for each one you see, for unseen rounds are already in the air." It was not just fear. It was mathematical terror. The Americans had calculated a way to make skill secondary. Volume, reliability, and logistics became the ultimate weapons. German pilots, trained to respect precision and explosive rounds, were now helpless against a relentless torrent of .50 caliber bullets. The story of the .50 caliber was no longer confined to the ground at Holzweier. It had taken to the skies. And the psychological impact, the knowledge that the next burst could kill instantly, would haunt the Luftwaffe for the rest of the war. The roar of the B-17's guns became a symbol of inevitability. The Americans could outproduce, outshoot, and outlast any German formation. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy were soaked in blood, sand, and fire. For the German defenders, the invasion seemed unstoppable until they realized the Americans fought in a way they had never seen before. Oberst Hans von Luck, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, surveyed the chaos. His seasoned troops, veterans of North Africa and the Eastern Front, were confident in their training, their doctrine, their weapons. The MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns were deadly in the hands of disciplined squads. Panzerfaust teams could ambush tanks at close range. Artillery could devastate advancing infantry. But all of this counted for nothing against the Americans. Every vehicle, every position, every tank destroyer, every half-track bristled with Browning .50 caliber machine guns. Jeeps, trucks, armored cars, all mounted at least one of these guns. And the Americans didn't just fire when needed. They fired constantly, suppressing, interdicting, and punishing any movement. Von Luck watched in horror as a single American armored column advanced. They didn't stop to negotiate terrain. They didn't wait for the perfect moment. Every suspicious building, every hedge line, every tree line was shredded by intersecting streams of .50 caliber fire. German squads trying to advance found themselves pinned by invisible hailstorms of bullets. Men froze in place, terrified to move, knowing that any step could be their last. American doctrine was clear: volume over precision, suppression over conservation. A single half-track, the M16 meat chopper, mounted 4.50 caliber guns in a powered turret, firing at nearly 2,200 rounds per minute. Infantry attacks that might have overwhelmed British or Soviet positions crumbled under relentless American fire. Even the elite panzer teams found themselves impotent. Tanks could be disabled externally, optical equipment shattered, accompanying infantry mowed down before they could react. Reconnaissance by fire meant the Americans didn't wait to find the enemy. They forced the enemy to reveal themselves, then punished every exposed position with a storm of lead. The psychological effect was as lethal as the physical one. German soldiers described a defensive mentality creeping over them. Movement in daylight became unthinkable. Even seasoned veterans from the Eastern Front, men who had survived Soviet human waves, hesitated under the relentless .50 caliber fire. It wasn't cowardice. It was mathematics, brutal arithmetic enforced by bullets. Urban combat added another layer of terror. Stone buildings that once offered safety became death traps. The Browning rounds penetrated walls, floors, and ceilings. A soldier could hide behind furniture, behind interior walls, and still be killed. The Americans had discovered something terrifyingly simple. Cover was meaningless against enough firepower. By the end of the Normandy campaign, the lesson was clear to the Germans. American victories were not just tactical, they were industrial. The .50 caliber machine gun, reliable, ubiquitous, and endlessly supplied, became the symbol of this doctrine. It didn't matter how skilled the soldier, how clever the tactics, or how disciplined the squad. The Americans had the means to break any position, and they would use it without hesitation BY late 1944, German forces had learned a terrifying new sound, the roar of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Nicknamed the Jug by American pilots, it carried 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns in its wings, 4,400 rounds per minute of sheer destruction in a single aircraft. For German infantry, the sound of the Jug approaching was a harbinger of annihilation. Engines throbbed low and ominous in the distance. Soldiers ducked instinctively, but cover offered no true safety. A strafing run meant the bullets would walk across hedgerows, farm fields, roads, and towns. Vehicles, artillery, and troops alike became targets of relentless, indiscriminate fire. In the retreat from Normandy, supply sergeants described the horror in post-war interrogations. You hear the engines first. By the time you look up, they are already firing. The bullets hit the road, the vehicles, the men, all at once. There is no cover that works. Trees snapped, stone walls crumbled, trucks shredded into flaming debris. Survivors often described the P-47's attack as a horizontal rainstorm of death. The Jug was not merely a fighter. It was a mobile artillery system, integrated seamlessly with American ground forces. Pilots on armed reconnaissance missions patrolled entire sectors, engaging anything that moved. A single pilot could strafe a convoy, dive on a tank platoon, and then sweep across a crossroads, all in a single sortie, expending thousands of .50 caliber rounds with lethal efficiency. German troops adapted by moving at night or in poor weather, but this came at enormous cost. Supplies that should have moved in hours took days. Reinforcements arrived late. Artillery emplacements were delayed, and the psychological toll mounted. The Americans had turned logistics into firepower, and the 50 caliber machine gun was the engine driving it. Even elite panzer crews found themselves trapped. The .50 caliber could not always penetrate the frontal armor of Tigers or Panthers, but it destroyed optics, disabled external equipment, and cut down accompanying infantry with terrifying consistency. The combination of tank-mounted and air-delivered .50 caliber fire created a battlefield no German soldier could safely traverse. At night, the effect became almost supernatural. American ammunition used a ratio of 1 tracer round to every 4 ball rounds. German soldiers could see the tracers streaking across the sky, marking death's trajectory. For every glowing tracer, for unseen rounds were flying toward them. Entire positions glowed with intersecting arcs of fire. Units reported freezing in place, mesmerized by the deadly light show, unable to move without courting almost certain death. The P-47, the M-16 half-track, and the M-10 tank destroyer were not just weapons. They were instruments of psychological warfare, enforcing the harsh reality of American industrial might. The Germans quickly realized that skill, courage, or superior tactics meant little when facing an enemy who could fire continuously, supply endlessly, and coordinate perfectly. By the time winter approached in 1944, the Germans had internalized a lesson. The 50 caliber machine gun was everywhere, and there was no safe place. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes forest was cloaked in fog, snow, and cold that pierced even the thickest uniforms. German forces launched their final major offensive in the west, the Battle of the Bulge. Initial surprise gave them early gains. Roads clogged with Allied traffic became battlegrounds. Villages changed hands in hours, and the Americans were caught off guard. But the Germans had underestimated the Americans' industrial advantage, and above all, the omnipresent .50 caliber machine gun. Even in the dense forests of the Ardennes, American forces could bring overwhelming firepower to bear. Every armored vehicle carried at least 1 Browning .50 caliber. Half-tracks bristled with multiple guns. Tank destroyers and tanks mounted them on turrets for infantry suppression. Night or day, snow or mud, these weapons fired relentlessly, and American crews were trained to use them without pause. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces became legends not just for courage, but for their sheer firepower. German infantry assaults were shredded before they could reach the defensive perimeter. Panzer units attempting to punch through were slowed, their infantry support decimated by intersecting fields of .50 caliber fire. Every move was calculated, every attempt punished, and the Germans discovered the harsh arithmetic of American doctrine. Movement meant death. For the German soldiers, the psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. Winter temperatures dropped below freezing, and continuous whine and thud of .50 caliber rounds created a constant, oppressive presence. Soldiers described as an omnipresent force, a reminder that no maneuver, no cover, no clever tactic could protect them. Experienced troops froze in place, hesitant to advance, waiting for an opportunity that never came. American doctrine emphasized overwhelming volume and constant suppression. Even when German forces attempted infiltration, night attacks, or ambushes, the 50 caliber guns were ready. Convoys, reconnaissance patrols, and defensive positions could fire at suspected targets immediately, saturating the battlefield and forcing German units to retreat or scatter. General der Fallen-Truppe Alfred Schlee, commanding the 1st Parachute Army, later reflected on the cumulative terror. By early 1945, my soldiers had learned to recognize the sound of American .50 caliber fire from miles away. They knew any movement could draw immediate death. We could not mount effective offensive operations because the Americans would simply bring overwhelming fire to bear anywhere, anytime. The M2 Browning wasn't just a gun. It was the spinal cord of American military doctrine. Mounted on vehicles, aircraft, and fortifications, it ensured that the Germans could never mass forces without facing annihilation. Even elite panzer crews, skilled in combined arms tactics, were reduced to observers of their own impotence. By the end of the Bulge, German hopes of a breakthrough had been crushed not by brilliant maneuvers, not by superior numbers, but by the relentless, indiscriminate, and psychologically devastating power of the .50 caliber machine gun. Early 1945. American forces were pushing deeper into Germany. Cities and towns that had once been quiet centers of life became chambers of death. German defenders, trained for conventional warfare, now faced a reality that shattered all expectations. American doctrine integrated the .50 caliber machine gun into every conceivable combat scenario, including urban warfare. Towns like Aachen, Cologne, and later the Rhineland became testing grounds for the devastating adaptability of American firepower. Tanks advanced along streets, turrets bristling with 50 caliber guns. Infantry followed, supported by half-tracks and jeeps, each vehicle ready to unleash devastating bursts of fire at anything that moved. German soldiers attempted to take positions in buildings, upper-story rooms, fortified houses, even church towers. But the .50 caliber had no respect for cover. Walls crumbled, furniture splintered, and floors became death traps. The massive projectile could penetrate multiple stories of masonry, turning once safe hideouts into death chambers. Tactical manuals became useless in the chaos. Panzerfaust operators, who normally could ambush tanks from concealed positions, found themselves cut down before they could even fire. Infantry trying to suppress advancing American tanks were shredded by overlapping fields of .50 caliber fire. Soldiers quickly learned a harsh truth. There was no safe place in the city. The psychological impact was relentless. Each room the Germans tried to defend became a trap. Soldiers abandoned positions not because they were defeated in direct combat, but because they knew the Americans would reduce their stronghold to rubble. Experience or skill mattered little. Survival depended on luck, timing, and often immediate retreat. Even German officers noted the cumulative strain. Combat fatigue, stress, and the terror of constant bombardment eroded unit cohesion. Veteran troops who had survived Eastern Front battles against human wave attacks and artillery found themselves frozen in fear against an enemy who could fire everywhere, all at once, and without pause. The 50 caliber machine gun had become more than a weapon. It was a psychological instrument, enforcing American dominance in every encounter. Tanks moved with confidence, knowing infantry support could suppress or destroy threats before they could act. American infantry advanced methodically, using sustained fire to secure each block, each intersection. The Germans were forced into reactive, defensive positions, always a step behind, always exposed. By the time American forces reached the Rhine, German defenders understood the terrifying reality. Urban terrain offered concealment, but never true protection. Each city became a proving ground for the M2 Browning, its tracers lighting the night sky, its rounds shattering the illusion of safety. 1944, France. German forces had learned the hard way that American supply lines were their lifeblood and their bane. Every road, every trail, every highway became a potential death trap. The Americans had integrated the .50 caliber machine gun into every vehicle in a convoy: trucks, jeeps, half-tracks, even armored personnel carriers, and had trained crews to fire immediately and relentlessly at any threat. German ambush doctrine, honed on Soviet and British forces, called for careful planning. Let the lead vehicles pass, hit the middle, and trap the convoy. Against the Americans, this tactic failed catastrophically. As soon as German infantry opened fire, every vehicle in the column returned fire. The intersecting fields of .50 caliber bullets made flanking, suppressing, or even hiding impossible. Ambushers often suffered heavier losses in the convoy they sought to destroy. Veteran German officers described the horror in post-war interrogations. Movement meant death. Vehicles that tried to advance became killing zones. Troops attempting to assault the convoy were mowed down in seconds. The sheer volume of fire, combined with its reliability, created a psychological stranglehold. Soldiers were paralyzed, knowing any attack would bring instant, overwhelming retaliation. American convoys didn't just survive attacks. They punished the attackers. Units employed a pattern of alternating fire. Right side vehicles fired to the right, left side vehicles to the left, creating overlapping zones of destruction. Even isolated German squads found themselves under fire from multiple angles, bullets tearing through trees, walls, and earthworks. There was no shelter, no safe flank, no opportunity for tactical ingenuity. The .50 caliber's impact was not only physical, but strategically devastating. German forces could not disrupt American logistics. Fuel, ammunition, food, and reinforcements flowed unimpeded, allowing American units to maintain relentless operational tempo. German commanders repeatedly noted that no matter how they maneuvered, the Americans had enough firepower to counter any move and enough material to outlast attrition. For the soldiers on the ground, it was terrifying. Survivors recounted watching vehicles explode, their comrades cut down, and tracers arcing through the night sky. Entire ambushes collapsed before they had even begun. One German platoon leader admitted, "We learned to only attack when absolutely forced, but even then, success was rare. The Americans had too many guns, too much ammunition, and they used them without hesitation." The American philosophy was clear: volume over precision, suppression over conservation, relentless over reserved. The .50 caliber machine gun was the centerpiece of this doctrine, a tool that ensured the continuous projection of firepower, turning every convoy into a fortress, every road into a controlled battlefield. By late 1944, German forces had largely given up attempting to disrupt American supply lines in areas where air and ground superiority were established. The psychological and material toll of facing continuous .50 caliber fire had broken their initiative, leaving the Americans free to dictate the tempo of operations. Autumn 1944. The Ardennes, Belgium. Darkness fell over forested valleys, but for German troops, night offered no comfort, only a new layer of terror. The Americans had found a way to turn night into a weapon. Each M2 Browning machine gun was loaded with a mix of ball and tracer rounds. One tracer in every 5 bullets illuminated the path of death, creating a deadly light show across the battlefield. German soldiers learned quickly. The glowing streaks arcing toward them marked their doom. By the time a tracer was visible, for more rounds had already passed. In the shadowy forest, the air seemed alive with invisible projectiles. Entire sections of infantry could be suppressed without a single visible shot landing. Reconnaissance by fire became a standard American tactic. Suspicious buildings, treelines, or roads were sprayed with .50 caliber fire, tracers lighting the sky and revealing enemy positions. German soldiers froze, mesmerized, paralyzed by the simultaneous fear of being seen and the certainty of being hit. Those who tried to move became easy targets. Those who stayed hidden could still be caught in overlapping arcs of fire. Officers noted that combat stress rose dramatically during nighttime operations. Veterans learned to ignore the tracers, rely on experience and instincts, but fresh recruits often froze. Entire squads could be neutralized not by bullets striking them, but by psychological collapse. The visual spectacle of the tracers also provided Americans with an unexpected tactical advantage. Gunners could correct aim in real time, concentrating fire where needed, while German return fire, limited in tracers and volume, was largely invisible and uncoordinated. Night engagements became a theater of controlled destruction, American firepower dictating the battlefield even in darkness. Meanwhile, American doctrine emphasized universal deployment. Every vehicle, tank, and half-track carried at least 1.50 caliber gun. Infantry squads had crew-served versions ready to suppress enemy positions. The Germans had no equivalent. Each German attempt to flank or counterattack was met with continuous, intersecting fire from multiple angles, making coordination nearly impossible. By the end of 1944, German soldiers feared the night as much as the day. The M2 Browning had transformed the darkness into a battlefield of glowing death, a psychological instrument that forced constant caution, slow movement, and perpetual stress. The Americans weren't just attacking positions. They were breaking the will to fight. Winter 1944, the Ardennes. The Germans had learned to fear daylight and night alike. Now, the Americans brought the full might of combined arms tactics to bear, with the .50 caliber machine gun at the center of every attack. Tanks, half-tracks, infantry, and aircraft all worked in unison, creating a relentless wall of fire that German forces could neither penetrate nor evade. M10 tank destroyers, equipped with rear-mounted M2S, supported advancing infantry. Each turret-mounted .50 caliber could sweep fields, rooftops, and trenches with devastating accuracy, suppressing defenders before tanks or soldiers closed in. Infantry squads followed, their own Browning M2S providing overlapping fire zones. German positions that once seemed defensible were systematically reduced without the attackers ever exposing themselves. From the skies, P-47 Thunderbolts added another layer of terror. Each plane carried 8 M2 machine guns, unleashing thousands of rounds per minute in strafing runs. Villages, road intersections, and armor columns became open-air targets. Trees splintered, stone walls shattered, and vehicles were ripped apart as if made of paper. German soldiers learned the sound of approaching engines and the whistle of .50 caliber rounds as a prelude to annihilation. Even armored Panther and Tiger units, the pride of German engineering, were vulnerable. While the M2 could not pierce frontal armor, it could disable optics, cut communication wires, puncture fuel tanks, and suppress accompanying infantry, isolating the tanks and leaving them exposed to coordinated assaults. American doctrine emphasized using every weapon in concert, making each German position a target from multiple angles simultaneously. Urban combat demonstrated the M2's versatility. American tank commanders fired their .50 calibers at upper-story windows and rooftops, forcing defenders down and clearing paths for advancing troops. Streets that might have slowed an armored advance were cleared by continuous suppressive fire, allowing American forces to dictate the tempo and flow of combat. German soldiers were trapped in a nightmare of firepower. Attempts to regroup, flank, or mount counterattacks were met with intersecting bursts from infantry, tanks, and aircraft. Ammunition supplies were virtually limitless, allowing Americans to fire continuously, while German forces were forced to conserve every round. The mathematics of firepower were simple. The Americans could always outgun the Germans, no matter skill or experience. By the end of 1944, the Germans had no answers. Elite troops, experienced officers, and armored vehicles were rendered ineffective against a doctrine built on ubiquity, reliability, and overwhelming fire. The .50 caliber Browning was not merely a weapon. It was a backbone of American battlefield dominance, turning every attack into a calculated symphony of destruction and psychological terror. Early 1945. Germany's Western Front was unraveling. German troops, battered and demoralized, faced an enemy whose doctrine, weapons, and logistics had made resistance almost meaningless. At every turn from forests to villages, from highways to urban streets, the .50 caliber Browning machine gun dominated the battlefield. Soldiers and officers alike recognized a bitter truth. Tactics, courage, and experience were no match for overwhelming firepower combined with industrial might. German infantry could not advance without exposure. Armor could not maneuver without suppression. Even night offered no sanctuary. The M2 was everywhere, mounted on tanks, half-tracks, jeeps, aircraft, and always firing. The psychological toll was as lethal as the rounds themselves. German soldiers became hesitant, anxious, and increasingly defensive. Movement was delayed, attacks faltered, and confidence eroded. The constant threat of immediate, indiscriminate death broke the cohesion of units that had once been elite. Veterans who had survived the Eastern Front admitted that facing American .50 caliber fire was unlike anything they had encountered before. No human wave, no artillery barrage, no cunning maneuver could match it. By the Battle of the Bulge, this reality became undeniable. German surprise offensives initially succeeded through planning and daring, but American logistics and ubiquitous firepower centered on the M2 crushed momentum. Every counterattack met unrelenting suppressive fire. Ammunition flowed without pause. Positions were neutralized before they could consolidate, and the Germans were left counting casualties they could not replace. The strategic lesson was profound. Superior training and advanced weapons meant little against a force that could sustain overwhelming material expenditure. The Americans had built a system, not just a weapon. The M2 Browning, simple yet reliable, mass-produced, and universally deployed, was the epitome of that philosophy. Even decades later, the legacy endured. 80 years after its introduction, the M2 remains in service, testament to its robustness, versatility, and effectiveness. It proved that in industrial warfare, the combination of reliability, abundance, and tactical doctrine can be more decisive than technical sophistication or battlefield cunning. For German soldiers, the .50 caliber machine gun became a symbol of everything they could not overcome. An industrialized, relentless opponent whose doctrine favored overwhelming force and constant pressure. For historians and military strategists, it became a case study in how firepower, logistics, and doctrine converged to define the outcome of modern warfare. The war ended, but the lessons of the M2 Browning echoed across battlefields and generations. In the smoke and ruin of Europe, it had proven that sometimes the simplest weapon, used relentlessly and intelligently, can reshape the course of history.